Age of Mythology Retold is coming out in a month, and you're all going to have to sit down and listen so I can have an outlet to gush. The original is one of my all-time favorite games. It's an RTS where historical societies fight alongside the mythological creatures and heroes that accompanied them. It's a game where you can help bring the pieces of Osiris together, assist in the creation of Thor's hammer, quest to keep Kronos locked in Tartarus. It's a game where you can ask Horus really nicely if he's gonna help you out. And you know what? Horus, he's an understandable bird. He sees that monument and he accepts the gesture. So he'll drop a tornado on Zeus's army. It's a really cool game. On top of that, it acts as an excellent bridge between pop culture and actual myth, leaning heavily on media like The Mummy, Jason and the Argonauts for its content, but then taking steps forward from that point in a way that leaves the player knowing so much more than they did before, and eagerly wanting to learn more. Yes, the Vikings didn't wear horned helmets, but guess what? If you're talking to someone who isn't invested enough to already know that, they're not going to care. Horned helmets are cool. Why correct a cooler headcanon? But you're doing a very good job in annoying them into never developing that investment, Craig. But play a badass game where you've got familiar Vikings and then more on top of that. Sure, people might keep a few incorrect mental images in their heads, but those were going to stick around anyway. And now they know what an Einherjar is. What does Wadjet have to do with Ta? I don't know. But the only reason I know what either of those things are and possess this confusion is because this game got me invested in the first place. It builds a bridge. These bridges are important. They make it significantly easier for people to cross into a deeper understanding in the future. And now a unique opportunity presents itself to repeat this process with a new generation. And not just for the Greek, Egyptian, and Norse, oh no. They're not just remaking the #1 game I wanted to remake for, they're also expanding it. Fixing the Chinese pantheon first, because that's a good call, that was just really bad. And then some mystery additional pantheon afterwards. So that's what I'm gonna talk about. Let's discuss the new things they could put in this fantastic game. First off, if this mystery civ isn't Mesoamerican, they're doing something wrong. This is the obvious choice. It's visually distinct and criminally underrated in pop culture. There's plenty of excellent creatures to turn into myth units, and much like Age of Empires, they would instantly gain a gameplay identity by simply not having cavalry. It's such a popular idea that there's already a fully functional mod that covers this exact concept. It's a great mod. I do hope Retold takes some inspiration from its ideas. But I do have notes on the generation of favor. For franchise noobs, favor is essentially your myth juice. What you spend to get things like hydras and fire giants. Every civilization generates it in a different way. The Greek villagers pray at temples, Egyptians build monuments, and the Norse beat the shit out of the Greeks and the Egyptians. In this mod, the Aztecs can purchase or capture prisoners to sacrifice them for favor. Now this is something the Aztecs did, but I'm not fond of this implementation from both a history and gameplay perspective. Gameplay-wise, there's a lot of overlap with the Norse there, and it encourages heavy turtling and discourages raiding against an Aztec player, as if anything goes wrong, you're donating favor to your enemy. Then historically wise, I just think it's a bit simplistic. How the Aztec mythology used sacrifice was much more convoluted. So I want to propose what would be the big bridge between pop culture and actual history here. There were some fascinating rituals where an individual would essentially become the face of a specific god for a year, and worshipped as such, living a life of luxury and bliss right up to the point they were sacrificed. Their bodies were treated as literal holy relics, as if they were the remains of the gods themselves. I find that to be way more compelling. That's gonna be the main source of favor. Gameplay-wise, it's even better. Creates an identity somewhat akin to the Regicide game mode in Age of Empires 2, and still leaves room for some kind of prisoner system to work. This is because it corrects the risk-reward of raiding the Aztecs with such a high priority target. If an opponent can just snipe this one unit, they can severely hamper their opponent's favor generation and prevent them from getting a relic. There's already a pretty good gameplay identity here in this mod, and this idea doubles down on that. That of a civilization that gets their favor in bursts that can massively swing the tides of battle. Moving past Mesoamerica, assuming this game continues to be supported long term, which it should, the next place I'd want to turn to is actually further north in America. It's a region that struggles to get into most Age of games due to a lack of defensive infrastructure until colonialism. Which sucks because it hampers the unique identity of native tribes. They need to be partially defined by the technology they adapted to, as otherwise there'd be no balance against the gunpowder-heavy Europeans. But none of that has to matter whatsoever when there's a giant thunderbird flying overhead. This would be a little trickier, as native traditions aren't nearly as centralized like most other potential candidates, legends changing from tribe to tribe. But I think it's still doable. Either by committing heavily to one specific group, I think the Inuit would be excellent candidates for this, or by embracing the inevitability of this being a composite culture and leaning into that instead. Change up the major and minor god systems to no longer be individual deities, but instead the ceremonies of groups of people. You're not worshipping a particular Shoshone figurehead, you're bringing the Shoshone themselves into your warband. Mythical units and benefits based on some of their ceremonies following in turn. In the sense of building bridges from pop culture, I think I prefer this one. It would demonstrate that there's an incredibly dense scattering of mythos that one single faction just can't cover. Gameplay-wise, I see a Native American faction working a bit like the Mongols in Age 4, a nomadic civilization. They don't need defensive fortifications because they are constantly on the move. This already becomes compelling as a faction due to Age of Mythology's reliance on town centers for its population caps. You have to control more of the map to get a larger army. These tribes would still rely on these settlements, but instead of building on top of them, they'd convert them into mobile settlements. Meaning it is absolutely a viable strategy to prevent your opponents from expanding by just stealing their expansion altogether. Past the nomadic stuff, there's a lot of neat things native myths could bring gameplay-wise. Also a lot of easy mistakes to make. I'm not blind to the constant controversies that surround attempting to do something like this. There are some that would argue against trying for this very reason. It's not worth the effort. But I think that's naive. It feeds sensationalism for one thing, which is never good. But more pressingly, Viking horned helmets. Once something is in pop culture, it's stuck there. It's the default setting. You can try to push it aside and be useless, or you can try to start building a bridge away from it. You must create something with quality to overwrite inaccuracy. An Until Dawn Wendigo to counterbalance the Deer Skull version. For example, Skinwalkers, arguably the most pop culture Native American myth. It's from the Navajo. They don't like talking about them at all. So what to do here? In an ideal world, you'd get a few tribesmen. It's important to have multiple voices, who are down to consult on a step in the right direction depiction. But to toss out my amateur take, these would come alongside the Navajo faction. I'd make the Navajo a starting faction for this reason, an equivalent to a major god in the other pantheons. The Skinwalkers would not be myth units though. They're evil, they're bad news, not allies, we don't like them. Instead, they are randomly scattered across the map. They are wild Gaia units, hiding in huntable herds. Now the Navajo have medicine men whose magic can protect their hunters from these witches, forcing them to leave. Their opponents have no such luck. They don't understand these dark magic users, and have to either devote time to dealing with them, or resort to other food gathering methods earlier than they would like to. It's still not perfect, but it is a better interpretation of the Skinwalker myth, while also serving a genuine function in-game by providing a resource advantage. That's the kind of goal to aim for. Build the bridge, take a step in the right direction. After the Americas, Africa is begging for any kind of broad showcase of its mythology. there's few instances of pop culture to even build a bridge from. But that does open up creative opportunities in its own right. I'm not going to pretend like I would know where to start here, I would just love to see it. Same with Aboriginal Australian. Australia has never had a chance to shine in any Age of game, and I think it'd be cool to finally have that chance. Moving further north, Japan could effortlessly join China down the line. There's a whole slew of Asian myths for that matter, including the second most obvious choice, ridiculously rich with content and effortless to implement, which is Hindu. And for this, I have to get real with this video, because Hindu is heavily actively practiced. Inclusion of this sense risks offending people. We have direct examples of this from the same thing happening with Smite. To walk the same path might be a mistake. So clearly, as appealing an option as it is, we obviously have to be more ambitious and add Hindu after we take on the #1. Smite chickened out when it could have made history, but we will be strong. To actually get real, some might interpret this as disrespectful, which first off, you better have been thinking that since I discussed Native American legends, otherwise I don't respect the double standard. But let me present my case that this is a healthy evolution. The role that myth and religion has played throughout history is fading. Scientists hypothesize it arose as an organization of the state, something to keep people united across language barriers, across great distances, to keep society together in the face of political turmoil, or famine, or plague. It has also existed as an explanation for natural events that we couldn't comprehend at the time. It was very effective at its job, but nowadays, the internet, global communication has invaded that role. It does it far more efficiently, to the point that it's almost removed language barriers altogether. People can now easily gather around a celebrity, or a global competition. Do so in an instant. They can rally behind disaster relief while watching the disaster play out in real time. Almost every belief system on the planet is struggling to keep up, and that fracture is going to get exponentially more extreme. As such, while in earlier days, the pushback towards depictions in media may have put those beliefs on a tier above the likes of the Greek myths, as time has moved on, for younger generations, I think we're hitting a point where it's landing a tier below. Because this stuff is interesting and exciting, it's worth getting invested in. And this is non-existent. A rare set dressing in Persona, a gun in Hades, a simplified surface-level conflict like Doom or Diablo. Like open question to my audience. How many of you knew Hindu was the third largest religion? And for those that did, how much more do you know than that? People don't start respecting something until they have avenues to slowly learn about it. And much like the bridges I've been discussing, nobody starts at the destination. People's aversion to a topic does not equal their respect towards it. That's just fear of conflict at play. So I would argue the healthiest way forward is to start building those bridges, to ensure that in a future where belief is faltering, respect and understanding is still there. Let me be clear, I'm rigidly agnostic. I don't personally value sanctity in most forms it takes. If I was making this for my tastes, Jesus would be dual-wielding thorn whips like Silas in League of Legends. But I think it would be nice if we could have pieces of media where people across belief systems, across the world, could see their respective cultures represented and have the majority think, yo, that's so cool though. Let me put it this way. DreamWorks' The Prince of Egypt. That's a great film. It takes the myth seriously, it trusts its audience to handle a volatile topic like religion with grace, you still get a feeling of sanctity from it, while also featuring a musical number with Steve Martin and Martin Short. That's really impressive. For a far more topical example, I'd point to how Smite handled putting in Shiva. The season before had built up the classic conflict between Gilgamesh and the big bad Tiamat. There's a whole cinematic of all these legendary figures duking it out, only for Ganesh to summon Shiva, who effortlessly, peacefully resolves everything through his sheer power. He doesn't defeat Tiamat, he shows her that there's a better way forward.
No matter who you worship, where you call home, we are all connected in this life.
That is the vibe to aim for, to take a step down the bridge to an equal playing field. For Hindu, for Aztecs, for Christianity, for Native American traditions, for everything. Some are stepping in different directions, but I'd argue it's a journey worth taking regardless of the road traveled. So, how to do this? Well, the further back in time you go, the closer it resembles its contemporaries. So let's focus primarily on Old Testament shenanigans. The easiest way to dodge the split of the organization down the line is to stick to the origin. This is a monotheistic mythology, but that's easily worked around by starting a tier lower than other pantheons. So pick between archangels, say Gabriel, Michael, and Uriel. Myth units would primarily be different kinds of angels. God powers take from Old Testament stories, so turning units into salt and whatnot. And hero units take from Bible figures that would fit in the setting. I'm thinking David from David and Goliath here. Prophets would also work here, sacrificing combat for extreme utility to give unique edges. I'm picturing Moses parting the water on an island map here, to allow troops to move between them without the need for docks and transports. I know it's tempting to focus just on angels versus demons, that's the easy route to take. Forgo human characters for a war of the heavens. But that's the only thing that ever breaks into pop culture nowadays. To a point, I would argue it's developed an entirely separate identity. Plus, it's akin to looking at the war between the Greek gods and the Titans as the only bit of Greek mythology that matters. Obviously, that should still be present, but it's not the only thing. Now that said, there are some cool ways to illustrate the angel-demon duality here. Anytime you age up in the Abrahamic pantheon, you choose either an angel or major prophet akin to other civilizations. That is the minor god equivalent. But in doing so, you are giving your opponent a demon that will buff them in kind. Gameplay-wise, that's as if you're giving your opponent an extra minor god of benefits every time you age up. This is necessary because angels are stupidly overpowered. The Abrahamic faction is the strongest by far, stat-wise, and some things need to happen to balance out the scales. This is accomplished by a gate to hell that opens somewhere on the opponent's side of the map. This is a capturable building, like a plenty vault. It can be used to train special myth units if the player would like. And every so often, it'll send a wave of uncontrollable Gaia units to attack the Abrahamic player. Defeating those demons is how you get favor. And more importantly, again, an unbelievably unique gameplay identity. I don't think I've ever seen an RTS faction do this. To be stronger than others by default, but balance it out by buffing their opponent in the process. There can be interesting dilemmas of wanting to build a certain way, but also wanting to avoid giving your opponent a buff that matches it. Maybe you do have a water map, and Moses' power would be super useful here, but aging up in that direction also wakes up the Leviathan. And that thing is really hard to deal with. You could build a Titan Gate and summon Metatron, the strongest Titan in the game, but the moment Metatron touches the ground, a timer starts, and Lucifer is eventually going to pop out of that Hell Gate in response. And if you want to be really brave, scrap Metatron for Jesus. Where every other civilization gets giant, world-ending monsters, the Abrahamics just get a dude that the enemy can't kill because he converts anything he gets close to. Not only is that much more respectful than a combat hero, it would be such a funny win condition. To lose, not because your army was squashed by a monster, they just joined the other team. Will this actually happen? Almost certainly not. But I bet you, in the long term, if these developers were brave, this would be looked back upon as a genius move. And it would be so successful! For every person getting offended, which is just another way of saying good marketing, there would be 10 more relieved that someone is using the toys in their toy box for something cool that's actually respecting them a bit for once. World's Edge, Forgotten Empires. I know you probably won't, but if I can just inception this idea into your mind, you know it would make headlines. You know it would put this game on the map. If you can just weather the initial turmoil, you could be a trailblazer, a figurehead in video game history. Oh, I'm sorry, Tarble. Video game fantasy, that's my bad. Regardless of what happens, I already love this game. I am dying to play the Retold edition, and will likely stream it to try and convince as many of you to try it out too. I need this game to do well. To the point that I'm actively exploiting a volatile topic to capture attention. Will it work? Maybe not for me. But for a larger audience? I mean, there's only one way to find out.